All right, our next unit here is on circles. And for this first lesson, we're going to be dealing with equations and graphs of circles. So we're going to be bringing a little bit of algebra into our geometry here. And so you'll see in green, we have this equation. This is the form of equation that we're going to use for circles. And you'll notice it has an x and a y. So that's like the x and a y you'd put on a graph. And then you have these other letters. And here's what these other letters represent. We have H and K, and those represent the center of the circle. So the H is the x coordinate at the center of the circle, and the K is the y coordinate. And one thing that's really important here is H and K are both being subtracted. That when you write down the center of the circle, like you have down here, there's no negative sign in front of those numbers. We have positive H and positive K. So what you have to do as you go from the equation to the center of the circle, from the equation to the point itself, you change the signs on those numbers. And same thing if you were to go the other way. If they gave you the center of the circle and you had to put it in an equation, you'd have to change the sign. So if you look at this picture on the bottom right, the center is positive 3, negative 1. But when we see the equation, we have a minus 3 and a plus 1. So that the signs change on both of those numbers as you go back and forth from the equation to the point. The other letter we have here is the R, and R stands for radius, and that's the distance from the middle of the circle to any point on the outside. It's a consistent distance. And when you put that into the equation, it's always squared. So it's going to be R squared, and R would be your radius. So let's look at some different types of problems we can do with this. The first couple we're going to do, give us an equation. We want to identify the center, we want to identify the radius, and then we want to sketch a graph of the circle. So first thing with the center, I'm going to use those two numbers that are in the parentheses with x and y. So the minus 3 and the plus 2. And when I identify the center of the circle, what I want to do is change my signs. So that minus 3 is going to become a positive 3. And that plus 2 is going to be a negative 2. And here's another way you can think of this plus 2. If you remember the equation I gave you, in that second parentheses, it said y minus k. And so if you think of subtraction happening here, what this would be, or the way you could rewrite it, is as y minus negative 2. So if you think of it that way, your k is going to be negative 2. And when you subtract negative 2, you end up adding it. So that's your center. Change the signs on both numbers. Your radius comes from this number on the other side of the equal sign. And that number on the other side of the equal sign is not the radius, it's the radius squared. So r squared equals 9. So if you want to find the radius, you take the square root of that number. And sometimes you'll have a number that doesn't really break down, but here we do. We have 9, and we know that the square root of 9 is 3. So 3 is our radius. So with that information, we can sketch a graph. So the first thing I want to do is identify where the center is on the graph. So it's positive 3, negative 2. I'll go 3 to the right and 2 down and make my point. And then I know the radius is 3, which means from this center point, I can go 3 out in any direction and find a point that will be on the circle. So to get a rough sketch, I'm just going to go up 3 and make a point. I'll go 3 to the right, 3 down, 3 to the left. So that gives me 4 points on the outside of the circle. And then I'm going to do my best to connect these and make a circle. And my circle probably won't be that great, but it'll at least give you a rough idea of what it should look like. So there you go. That's a circle with a center at 3, negative 2, and a radius of 3. So let's do another one. And again, we're going to start by finding the center. And with my x, I have a positive 1. So again, I'm going to change the sign, and my x value at the center will be negative 1. The thing that's a little different here is when I go to y, I don't have anything in parentheses with y. I just have a plain old y. So whenever that happens, it's always going to be 0. So I'm going to use 0 for my y coordinate. And here's why. If you wanted to rewrite this with a number in parentheses with y, the way you would do that is you would say y plus 0 squared. So that's kind of how you think of that when there's no parentheses, when there's no other number. So our center point here is -1, 0. Our radius, again, comes from that number on the other side of the equal sign. And again, because that number is radius squared, we've got to take the square root. So what we're going to have is square root of 17. Now that doesn't break down. That is an irrational number, and that's probably the best way to write it. So that's our radius, but when we graph it, we're going to need to have some idea of about what square root of 17 is. So let's go ahead and put the center point down first, and then we'll look a little more at that radius. So the center is -1, 0. So I'm going to go 1 to the left, 0 up or down, and that's my center point right there. So my radius, to get a sketch of this, I got to have some idea of what square root of 17 is. And I know whatever it is, it's got to be a little bit bigger than square root of 16. And the reason square root of 16 is important is because I know what the square root of 16 is. I know it's 4. So whatever square root of 17 is, it has to be a little bit bigger than 4. Not much, because these two numbers are very close together. It's going to be a tad bigger than 4. So when I do my graph, I'm going to start at my center point. I'm going to go up a little bit more than 4. And then I'm going to go to the right a little bit more than 4. Down a little bit more than 4. And to the left a little bit more than 4. And then I'm going to connect my points, doing my best to make a circle that probably won't be very good. And there you go. So that's the graph of x plus 1 squared plus y squared equals 17. All right, here we don't have a graph. We just want to write the equation of the circle using this information. So we've got our center point at 6, -3. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and just set this up and leave blank the h, the k, and the r. So I'm going to have x minus something squared. I'm going to have y minus something squared, and then I'll have r squared, so I'll have something squared. And we'll just kind of put these numbers in where they go, and I'll use a different color for this. So again, the center, 6, -3. I'm going to put the 6 in with the x, so we're going to have x minus 6, and the -3 with the y. So we'll have y minus -3. And then I will put the radius in where it goes, and so we'll have 8 squared. And we'll do a little bit of simplifying here because we probably don't want to have like a double negative. So x minus 6 squared plus y, we got minus -3, so we're going to change that to plus, y plus 3 squared. And then we'll square the 8, so 8 squared is 64. So the idea when you build one of these equations, you're always changing the sign on these two numbers in the center. So that positive 6 becomes -6, the -3 becomes +3, and then you square the radius. So 8 gets squared, and we get 64. All right, let's take a look at another one of these. So the center this time is at -2, 0. Our radius is a square root. And again, I'm gonna set this up the same way. We're gonna have x minus something squared. We're gonna have y minus something squared. And we're gonna have our radius squared. And I'm just gonna plug in these numbers again in a different color. So we're going to have minus a -2 in the first parentheses. We're going to have minus 0 in the second parentheses. And then our radius is going to get squared is square root of 17. I'm going to go ahead and put that in parentheses. That's probably the best thing to do when you have a radical like that. And then let's go ahead and simplify this one. So x minus -2, we know that minus a negative becomes plus, so that becomes x plus 2. Whenever you have y plus or minus 0, you really don't need the 0, so we can just write this as y by itself squared. We don't need another number since the number is 0. And then for this last part, when you square the square root of 17, you square a square root, what happens is the exponent and the radical, the square root sign, they cancel out. And you just have plain old 17. So whenever your radius is written as a square root like that, when you put it in the equation, all you have to do is get rid of that square root sign and you're good to go. All right. Couple more things to look at here. It says a circle has the following equation, and it gives you the equation. It wants you to write an equation of a circle translated 4 to the left and 2 down. So here's what we're dealing with. We know that when you do a translation, that's called a rigid motion. I'm going to make a note of that. That's something we talked about earlier this semester. And what a rigid motion is, it's something that changes the position of a shape that doesn't actually change the shape or size. And why that's important is because our radius has to stay the same. So this last number, that's our radius squared, has to stay the same. We don't change this number. So to do the translation, then one thing we're going to look at that we can figure out from this equation is the center. So here's what we want to do. We're going to identify the center of the original equation, and that's going to be positive 3 and negative 8. Remember, you change the signs. Now, if we go 4 to the left, so what we're going to do is we are going to take our x coordinate here, and left is negative. So we're going to subtract 4, add negative 4 to it. We're going to have 3 minus 4. Then we go 2 down. So we're going to take our y coordinate, which is negative 8, and we're going to go down 2 from there. So we're going to subtract 2. And so now when we work that out to get the center of new circle, (3 minus 4 is negative 1. Negative 8 minus 2 is going to be negative 10. So the center of the new circle is going to be negative 1, negative 10. So let me, again, switch colors so it's really clear what my final answer is here. So now our equation, we're going to have x, we have minus 1, so we got to change that to positive, plus 1 squared, plus y, again, it's a negative, so we change that to plus, so it's going to become plus 10 squared equals our radius squared. That last number on the other side of the equal sign doesn't change. It still has to be 81. So that's how you do a translation. You figure out what the center is, and then you move each coordinate however many places, left or right, up or down. You get the new center point, and then you put it back in the equation, and that's your final answer. Let's do one more of these. So here we have the equation x squared plus y plus 2 squared equals 52. And we want to translate it 6 to the right and up 5 up. So let's find our center of this circle first. So the center here, we don't have anything with the x, so that's going to be a 0. And our y, we have plus 2, so that's going to become negative 2 or minus 2. So our center is at 0, negative 2. So now we want to do the same thing we did before. We're going to take our 0. That's our x coordinate. It said 6 to the right. So right means positive. We're going in the positive direction. So we're going to do plus 6. And we're going to do the same thing with our y coordinate. We were at negative 2 was our y coordinate. We go 5 up. Up is positive, so we're going to add 5. And what we're going to end up with, 0 plus 6 is 6. Negative 2 plus 5 is 3. So our center is at 6, 3. So that's what we're going to put into our equation. So now what we're going to have is x minus 6, because we always change the sign when you put it into the equation, squared, plus y minus 3, again, change the sign, squared equals, and then we use the same number we already had, the 52. That doesn't change when we do a translation. So that's how you do a translation. Again, identify the center point, move those coordinates the right number of spaces, left, right, up, down, plug it back into the equation. The radius, the r squared, stays the same. And so that is an example of a few of the different types of questions and problems we'll deal with that involve the equation of a circle.